Hello and welcome to Painting with Freehand Lines. Today's painting is Normanton Church, a quite magical church that appears to be floating on water due to a reservoir that was installed around it sometimes in the past. When creating a painting on water, one of the key elements is to really get across the reflection. So here I'm going to show in a short way the principle of what I use to create that reflection. So first off, I've drawn a cube and I'm going to pretend there's a water line, and then I'm going to draw the painting of the cube in the water. So having that reflection is the same thing below as above, and that's the way we start. The next move is to put the sky on. The sky is light, it goes dark at the top, lighter towards the horizon, but I generally just place the blue on and I work it around the edges to create the sky line right down to the horizon line, which is where the water's going to be. And then we will do the similar on the water side. Now, the water will reflect the sky and it will be particularly lightest at the horizon line. So in terms of keeping things simple, and I like to keep things very simple when I paint, I'm just going to reflect what's above that horizon line. So it effectively creates something of a mirror. Once we have that, the next move is to add darkness. Now, if you look at the water, it will be darker towards you and lighter towards the horizon. So that's what we do. We add a darker blue, much darker blue, and we start to work that up towards the horizon, wetting it a little bit and drawing that blue over the cube on the water. And that will start to create that tonal difference of what is effectively a darker sky below. And by dabbing and creating more dark around the edge, you will really get the idea that this is a shiny reflective surface, as you will see here. Dabbing the loaded watercolour off the cube and then adding more dark around the edges. And that's the principle of how you create a reflection in some respects. And we're going to do exactly the same as that principle in the painting itself. So to start, let's start with the sky. Getting on that lovely sky around the edges and fading it down so it's lighter at the bottom. The building is made from a lovely sandstone, and also the ramparts around the building are made from the same sandstone quarried locally. So for this, we're going to use the yellow ochre, as we typically do for this kind of colour, with a touch of burnt umber in there, and we're going to give it a light wash right across the building and the actual ramparts. As with the example earlier, we're going to reflect those ramparts in the water, and that reflection will happen just underneath the actual edge, because the horizon's in the distance here, so the reflection will happen directly where the building touches the water. And then we'll start to sketch out the church above in a rough way. There's different ways of doing reflections on still ponds. The reflection's almost like a mirror. When you have more moving water, it's a little bit more distorted and ripply. This is a bit more moving water, but still relatively still. So I'm going to do this just by using the brush. If I'm doing a pure reflection, I'll quite often use actual draw the reflection and then paint it to make sure I get that accuracy. And once that's done, we'll now start to add more richer tones to work up the building. continuing to work up those tones on both sides, remember, on the building and in the reflection. And it's usually best to do this as you go to make sure you kind of get enough of the detail matching. To get a few more details into the ramparts, I'm going to use a splayed brush, which gives lots of little dots and details, which are really useful for things like this, for dabbing on water, and also for trees and foliage. A very useful brush, and you can get different sizes, so I recommend purchasing these kind of brushes as well as the standard. Once the basics of the building are down and dry, we can start to add the water. As you can see, I'm going for a blue, very similar to sky blue, but just a tad darker, and I'm working that upwards and across the paint. I'll work that across the actual bit of reflection as well to tie it all together. This also has a really nice effect of bleeding the building into the background, the brown into the actual blue. You don't want it to bleed too much, so you don't want to overwork it, but some of that really is nice because it kind of pulls it all together. Adding details such as the glazing from such small windows in this composition, which is quite light. Having the darkness of the windows will really add contrast and depth. So I'm going to go for quite a dark Payne's grey for the window, almost pure Payne's grey in this case. And again, adding reflections in the water. Remember that the water will generally tend to be a tad lighter than the actual image above. It is a reflection. Reflections tend to be lesser. So the darkness of the and the intensity of the windows is been played down somewhat here. Now it's a case of working up the shadows, making sure the detail on the building and the articulation and the ramparts really does start to pick up the elements of the building and give it a three-dimensional nature. few more details to the water, pulling in the colours across, really starting to see, and I think you can see quite clearly now, the shimmer of the reflection of the church is really, really convincing, and it feels like you can almost jump into that water. So it's worth playing around with different reflections and different approaches to actually creating reflections. And as you do, don't be scared to work up the building more and more and add more detail and more shadow in it to give contrast. It is a really lovely thing. Reflection really gives more depth, I think, in any other than any other technique in painting. And the final details, and we're done. A really beautiful painting of a beautiful subject. So well done, and I hope you enjoyed painting Normanton Church. And I'm going to do quite a few of these other paintings showing how we work with reflections in water in my forthcoming series. So thanks for painting with me, and I look forward to next time.